visual of President Trump and MBS at the White House, surrounded by some of the richest people in the world.
Yeah.
I very rarely use the phrase oligarchy, but it certainly feels that way tonight. Elon Musk, Tim Cook, all the rest of them there with this Saudi leader who the CIA says killed this journalist.
So many resonant threads here. First, as you say, all of these corporate titans there. It felt like a command performance, but a command performance for who? Is it a command performance for MBS or for Trump? You know, I think more for Trump in the long run. I mean, if there is a motto of this Trump administration and the way it deals with every other institution in American society, it's the maxim attributed to a South American dictator from the 1930s, for my friends, everything, for my enemies, the law. I mean, people understand, you know, what it means. The tools of the government have been transformed into an extension of his will. It's almost like a medieval court in some ways. And I think, you know, you're seeing in the behavior of these seeming masters of the universe, you know, a very clear determination to stay on his good side, even if that means kind of cuddling up to a world leader who they might think twice about being seen in the same photo with.
The Trump supporters would say that the Biden administration did lawfare and that they went after him. And part of the reason he got the nomination again was because they went after him and rallied the base in his, and that they're doing the opposite. You say what?
Well, look, I mean, the president is firing he is ordering the Justice Department to investigate specific individuals that he has identified as his adversaries. He's firing U.S. attorneys who will not do that. They are pardoning a wide array of people for a wide array of offenses as long as they're seen as allies, and they are, prosecuting those seen as enemies. The part that I don't really understand is why all the people in that room tonight see it as acceptable to allow the concrete to harden on that vision of what justice is. Because unless you think that people allied with you are going to be in power forever, they are setting precedents that makes it very dangerous for anyone to be on the wrong side of the administration.
Let's bring this up full screen so we can talk about some of the names of the people that we're talking about here. So we're talking about Bill Ackman, Mary Barra, Mark Benioff, Tim Cook, the head of Apple, Bryson DeChambeau, the golfer, David Ellison, the head of Paramount, Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, Elon Musk, of course, Twitter, Tesla, all the rest, X, I should say, Cristiano Ronaldo, who accepted hundreds of millions of dollars from the Saudis to play soccer, and David Sachs, who's a supporter, big Silicon Valley guys.
Some of these are longtime Trump supporters and all that. Makes sense. But for the people who are kind of doing this transactionally, I go back to the article written, the op-ed piece written in late July by Biden's ambassador to Hungary. Name I'm forgetting, I apologize. But he basically wrote, look, I am watching what I watched under Orban. Everybody thinks they can make their own deal with the strongman to come out ahead, to kind of basically manipulate the system and come out ahead. And in the end, you can't, because they can always raise the ante. They always come back and demand more. I call it the Lando Calrissian principle from The Empire Strikes Back, where, he says, what Billy D. Williams' character says to Darth Vader, this deal just keeps getting worse. That's what happens in kind of strongman societies. And in the long run, all of these business leaders would be better off saying, look, this is no way to run a country. The way the federal government deals with us should not be completely dependent on our relationship with the leader. There should be objective rules and standards, but instead, as in Hungary, so many of them are betting, I can make the deal that benefits me and we won't worry about the big picture.
But is there a counter argument to that maybe it's good for business to have a good relationship with the president? That it's good for business to have a good relationship with Saudi Arabia? That ultimately that means maybe less regulations, more jobs, more benefits for people?
But there is a difference between having a good relationship because of your impact on the economy or your impact on the society versus having a good relationship because you are either A, enriching the person, or acquiescing to things that they are demanding that are really inappropriate for the government to demand.
So you've got a new column out on CNN.com where you talk about the Trump effect on elections and looking at whether he is a plus or a con. We know that he's been a plus for himself in presidential elections, certainly in 2016 and 2024, not so much in 2020. But what about other candidates going forward now?
He is a decisive factor either way. Like, we are living in an era where attitudes about the president are shaping the results of other races to a greater extent than in the past. I mean, that is a long-term trend that predates Trump, going back really to the 90s, to Bill Clinton. But even against that backdrop, Trump stands out. You know, if you look at, I went back and looked at all of the exit polls for all of the Senate races in 2018 and 2020 when he was in the White House. Susan Collins in Maine was the only Republican Senate candidate who won a race in a state where less than half of voters approved of Donald Trump.
Wow.
You know, and there were some occasions where Democrats won in states where he was over 50, but generally where a majority approved of him, they were able to beat Democrats. And if you look at what happened in this election this month, in Virginia, 92% of voters who disapproved of Trump voted for Spanberger. In New Jersey, 93% of voters who disapproved of Trump voted for Sherrill. In California, 91% of voters who disapproved of Trump voted for Prop 50. And maybe most revealing of all, Alex, in Jay Jones, that scandal-tarred attorney general candidate in Virginia, 89% of Trump disapprovers voted for him. If you go back and look at those Senate races, as I did, Susan Collins is the only Republican over those 2 years who held their Democratic opponent to less than 89% of Trump disapprovers. So if you're a Republican,
you should write some strongly worded letters.
Yes, if you're exactly, if you're a Republican, that is kind of the bottom line that you are looking at. And if you choose not to separate from him in a state where he is, you know, underwater, you are facing some serious currents running against you.
It's amazing how you're able to remember each one of those stats. You are something else, Ron. So today, I was invited to be a part of the USC Warsaw conference, which they hold every year. The USC Center for the Political Future hosts this. Mike Donilon was on a panel that I hosted. Mike Donilon was the senior advisor to President Biden, basically the main guy doing all of his politics, main guy doing his biggest speeches. And I asked him about all of the folks who have come after Biden in the last few weeks. And here's his reaction. We haven't really heard your perspective or President Biden's perspective.
I thought the Democratic Party lost its mind. That's what I thought.
Democratic Party lost its mind. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is I thought that Joe Biden was the best candidate. I thought he was the most likely person to be elected president. I thought he would be the best president. There was a perception about Biden out of the last campaign that he couldn't win. You may not believe it, but it's true. On the day he got out of the race, he was behind Trump by 3 points. I thought what happened in the party was, I thought it was disloyal. I thought it was an act of betrayal against the president.
Strong words there.
Yeah.
Your reaction.
Look, it's easy to understand why he feels that way. He has been invested in Biden. He's been close to Biden for a number of years, feels a great personal loyalty to him. But that's kind of delusional. I mean, there was literally, I think, no chance that Joe Biden was going to win the presidential election, even before the debate. You know, his disapproval rating on election day in the exit poll was close to 60%. There is just no precedent for a president winning re-election when 60%, when a majority of voters disapprove of his performance. Same thing we're talking about with Trump and his impact on the midterms. In fact, even when a president steps down, if he is that unpopular, his party loses the race to succeed him. Woodrow Wilson in 1920, Lyndon Johnson in 1968, George Bush in 2008. Even if you step aside, if a majority of voters think that your leadership is taking the country in the wrong direction, it's really hard to convince them to keep going in that direction with a candidate from your own party. Harris, I think, had obviously problems as a candidate. She didn't have a great amount of economic credibility at a time when that was the key issue, but she brought a jolt of energy to the Democratic Party, probably saved those 4 Senate seats that they won in states that, Trump won. And I just think if you look at where Biden was before the debate, and then you look at the way the debate confirmed the biggest single concern people had about him, that reinforced it, you can't see really any way, that plausible way that he would have won that election.
You got the sense today that what he was saying is also what Joe Biden thinks right now. And we'll have a lot more from Mike Donilon next hour on The Story Is. Ron, so great to have you in here.
Absolutely.
It makes a difference having you in the house.
Thank you
so much.